This is Nursing 390 PowerPoint project on foster parents Dee and Tom Corder by Tyler Pennell and Jocelyn Whitfield. This PowerPoint is based on the reading The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down by Anne Fadiman. Dee and Tom Corder were foster parents to Leah, and one of the things they were responsible for was controlling Leah's medication intake and her attendance of doctor's appointments and just the general care of Leah. Caring for the Lee family was to take care of Leah and advocate for the Lee family. Uh, the purpose of this project is to show that the care given by the Corders epitomizes what transcultural care should be in the healthcare system. Dee and Tom practice transcultural caring through caring in action, which refers to caring as an intentional human behavior engaged in with knowledge. One must choose an action that is directed toward a goal. And so Dee's goal was to console Leah and to give her a sense of normalcy. And so what she did is uh, she knew that Leah had not been weaned, and so she breastfed Leah alongside her own baby. And that just shows a great uh, fortitude that Dee had to be able to breastfeed two babies at once. Also, they exemplified transcultural caring as an effect. Um, Refers to and extends from emotional involvement with empathetic feelings for the patient's experience, feelings of concern and dedication, which motivates actions. And I'm just going to say that uh, Leah, she stated that Leah knew how to love and how to allow people to love her, and that they were blessed to have Leah, is what she told the social worker when the social worker came to interview her regarding Leah. And this just shows that she had empathy towards Leah. They had engaged in a relationship, more than just uh, uh, parent to child, but as caretaker to patient. And so Leah learned to trust Dee, and Dee uh, grew to be very responsible and love um, Leah. So there was an exchange there of caring as an effect. Also, caring as communicative action, uh, and that is just that an action and empowerment of critical reflection and social caring action regarding human rights and justice. And uh, Dee and Tom both understood that Leah really did not belong in child protective custody. She should not have been a foster child. After they forged a relationship with the Lee family from them coming in to visit Leah, they understood more and more that Leah needed to be reunited with her family. And in the text, Leah was the only one for whom Dee advocated for reunification with her family. And she advocated it to the social worker, but the social worker was really not trying to hear it, but she was advocating for them. And so her feelings um, were exhibited through action. Dee and Tom's interactions with the Lee family. The Cordas expressed cultural humility through being open and exhibiting knowledge and process. And the way that they expressed cultural humility was shown when Dee Corder accepted Leah into her home to be a foster parent to her. When the social worker called, she expressed that Leah was uh, severely ill with epilepsy, that she had behavioral problems, and that she was a Hmong child. And Dee Corder did not know what a Hmong child was. And she expressed this by just saying her parents must be great. And so uh, that was just saying that I have no preconceived notions and I have no biases and I will take the child. They expressed knowledge and process because she was committed to the process of being this child's foster parent and taking care of Leah and getting to know Leah and Leah's family. They exemplified cultural competency through understanding how the medicines affected Leah and why the Lees administered medicine inconsistent with medical instructions. And the reason they did this is because they had a, a relationship with the Lee family, from the Lees coming to the home and visiting, and they began to understand who the Lees were. She also began to understand that when she gave Leah the medicine made her very sick and almost incapacitated her. It said in the text that she was unable to walk, that she was literally passing out on her feet. And so she understood then why the Lees administered the medicine the way that they did, but that she also understood that there was a language barrier. And so Frau Lee could not express this to the doctors. She had no way of letting them know that the medicine, all she could say was that the medicine was no good, and they thought that she did not want to administer the medicine. And so that is the way they exemplified cultural competency. They also understood why the Lees incorporated rituals and traditional medicine in Leah's care, because they had begun to understand who the Lees were as a people, and just from a human standpoint, that everyone has their religion and their beliefs, and we are all here in the United States at a freedom to express that. And the Lees were no different just because they were Hmong. The Quarters also exemplified holism in their care for Leah and for Leah's family. Um, um, Dee did not just give Leah medical support, but spiritual and environmental support. Uh, She exchanged and engaged in love and responsibility for Leah, hence for Leah's parents. And so they engaged in holism. And holism is just uh, recognizing that someone is more than the sum or of its parts or of their parts. So we are not just our religion, and we are not just or education, and we are not just our poverty, or we're not just our language, but we are integrated in that people are not separated because they are Hmong or because they are Caucasian or because they're African American or Hispanic or African, but that we are all integrated. There is a integration of mind, body, and spirit, that we are part of our human environment, uh, and we are all interconnected, and even not just in the text, but we found this to be true even with COVID-19 going on. So I understand that Dee and Tom, their interactions with the Lee family, allowed them to exemplify holism, and not just for Leah, but for her family as well. Dee and Tom's interactions with the Lee family, the Quarters expressed cultural humility um, when the social worker called and asked Dee Quarter if she would take a very ill child with epilepsy, behavioral problems, and a Hmong and one of Hmong descent. Dee's reaction was, "Sure, don't you just love them?" And that just proved that Dee was willing, uh, that she had no preconceived notions, biases, or prejudices. She was open to accepting Leah Lee into her home and into her life. And it goes to the same goes for the family. But then they expressed knowledge and process. Dee and Tom were committed to helping Leah and her family. A very trustworthy relationship was established when the Lees came to visit Leah in the Quarters home. So much so that Dee left her baby with Fowley when she had to take Leah to to her doctor's appointments. They were committed to a lifelong learning. Dee understood how the medicine gave Leah side effects and why the Lees were giving Leah uh, medication inconsistently. There was a language barrier, and they could not communicate or were not listened to when trying to communicate their concerns regarding the medication to the doctors. And Tom Porter also understood why the Lees incorporated rituals and traditional medicine into Leah's care plan. They understood that the Lees felt that the medicines were making Leah sicker and that they could rely on their religious beliefs. The Porters exemplified holism. Dee Quarter cared for Leah as she did her own children. She welcomed the Lees into her home, integrating her culture with theirs, allowing the relationship to grow and to become dynamic, not trying to change one another, but accepting one another. There were no parts. We are not our language only. We are not our jobs only. We are not our socioeconomic standing only. We are not our race only. And we are not our religion only. It takes all of these parts to make us who we are. And so Dee and Tom understood that about themselves and about the Lees. And so uh, they forged a very good relationship, a long term relationship with the Lee family. Dee and Tom's interactions with the Lee family. The Quarters expressed cultural humility through being open and exhibiting knowledge and process. And the way this was shown was when the social worker called and asked Dee Quarter if she would take a very ill child with epilepsy, behavioral problems, and one of Hmong descent. Dee's reaction was, "Sure, don't you just love them?" That was not the normal reaction to uh, the Hmong people. So this shows that Dee had no preconceived notions, biases, or prejudices. She was open to accepting Leah Lee into her home and life. Knowledge and process. Dee and Tom were committed to helping Leah and her family. A very trustworthy relationship was established when the Lees came to visit Leah in the Quarters home. So much so that Dee left her baby with Fao Lee when she had to take Leah to doctor's appointments. They were committed to lifelong learning. They exemplified cultural competency. And the way they did this was they exemplified this through understanding how the medicines affected Leah. Uh, the medicine gave Leah side effects. And this is why the Lees were giving Leah medicine inconsistently. There was a language barrier as well, and they could not, or were not listened to when they tried to communicate their concerns regarding the medication. D. Corder understood why the Lees incorporated rituals and traditional medicine into Leah's care plan because they felt that the medicines were making Leah sicker. The Corders exemplified holism. D. Corder cared for Leah as she did her own children. She welcomed the Lees into her home, integrating her culture with theirs, allowing the relationship to grow, to experience a dynamic shift, not trying to change one another, but accepting one another. There were no parts. They did not accept the Lees in parts. We are not our language only. We are not our jobs only. We are not our socioeconomic standing only, not our race only, not our religion only. It takes all of these parts to make us who we are and to allow us to enjoy relationships with others. Reflection. I now have a greater knowledge of how structural competency plays a role in our ability to see those we serve in a holistic manner. We must see an individual culturally interconnected and integrated within ourselves and the environment with all of the social determinants that influence the individual's health and life. Reflection. I now have a greater knowledge of how structural competence plays a role in our ability to see those we serve, work, and interact with. We must see an individual holistically. We are required to see them culturally and connected, integrated within ourselves and the environment with all of the social determinants that influence the individual's health and life. Only then can we treat one another with respect and dignity. A specific policy for opportunities to co-create the future of healthcare and advance the health of citizens would be to innovate an education system that acknowledges cultural humility and structural competency as mandatory courses for anyone who is seeking to work in the healthcare field. We need to advocate an increase in government funding in the healthcare system. A healthcare system that can adequately serve the public without prejudice, biases, and power imbalance. There are already laws, policies, and procedures in place to protect the rights of all people through the healthcare system or in the healthcare system. However, these entities have provided little protection for those who are marginalized and seek healthcare services. There is no policy or procedure that you can put in place that can regulate the heart, the spirit, and the soul of a person. We must all make a choice uh, when we choose to serve and just on an everyday basis of when we choose to interact with others. And the choice must be that of holism. If it is not, then I'm afraid for what the healthcare system will look like in the future.
My name is Tyler, and this is the second half of the recording. I'm going to be starting with the continued version of Dee and Tom's interactions with the Lee family. Once Leah's parents knew where the Cordes lived, they visited as much as their nephew could take them on the long drive. The Cordes gave the Lee children swimsuits so they could all swim while they visited their home. The families became so close that Lee's oldest daughter spent a week at their house. The Lees taught Dee how they carried Leah and how she slept in their bed with them. Leah had so many medical appointments ranging from 2 to 5 a week that months after forming their relationship, when Lee had to take care of Leah, Val would take care of Dee's baby while she was away. This was one of the first times that a legally abusive mother took care of the foster parent's child. It was a whole thing. So what kind of issues do Dee and Tom encounter? Ethical issues with the treatment of Leah by the hospital nurses and staff. Dee got to see firsthand how they treated Leah and her parents. They were degrading and treated her with a lack of passion and care. Sociocultural issue was the treatment of Val and Neo. Dee saw this with the Lees as well. The doctors were dismissive and degrading to them, as well as how they treated Dee and Janine with the complete opposite, with much respect before they even knew them or their intentions. They were also faced with Leah's exhaustive health issues. Leah had a lot of doctor's appointments that the Cordes were expected to attend. Leah's temperament and demanding needs due to separation. Dee accommodated Leah's extensive needs by sleeping with them in their bed, carrying her on her back with her other baby on the opposite side, and even breastfeeding her. Leah cried for 10 days after arriving at their house. She acted out of spite, pulling down her underwear and peeing on the floor, smearing feces, and even food striking, for example. Spirituality of the Hmong regarding sickness was not realized. Cal by Child Protective Agency. Cal rightfully causing issues through destructive manners with threatening the translator Sue, and to commit suicide if Leah did not come home. Dee and Tom's role in the healthcare system. Dee and Tom acted as voices for Leah and the Lee family. They reinforced Leah's medications and treatment plan, and they were taken seriously by the doctors. Being with Dee and Tom, Leah was still seizing, even when she was being given the medications prescribed by the doctors and giving them accordingly. Dee and Tom's role in Leah's healthcare shows that her parents were right all along. She was still seizing through the medications. But because of the lack of cultural humility from her doctors, the doctors only assumed the Hmong were incompetent and neglectful. The Lees could not give Leah her medication appropriately, and when they did, they didn't like how it made Leah act, and it made her act like a zombie. And this is the same experience that Dee had while caring for Leah. Reflecting on this class and this project, cultural humility has taught me to genuinely strive to understand a person's culture. It has allowed me to see the cultural bias from a healthcare stance and acknowledge the power of race and religion. This book taught me firsthand experience into power imbalance and just how easily those without power can be silenced and lost in the system. I will always use my power to make sure that everyone is heard and treated on the same level. And that is what this book taught me. There is a huge error with just the basics. A vision that I created for this project is a specific policy for opportunities to co-create the future of healthcare and advance the health of citizens. For the future, implementing strong foundations of the healthcare system in a global setting. Sources that are positive and accommodating based on the community to implement routine care and not just for sick needs, but also to combat specific geographic illnesses to certain locations. Also empowering communities and no hidden fine print to trap community members by giving them a positive source for care that is culturally appropriate for them and not westernized, but also fits their needs and comfort. These sources can and should be formed through the different outlets available, such as work environments, churches and/or temples, schools, and many other residential kind of communities. These concepts learned in this course are greatly demonstrated through the first article I've cited, which is on the next slide, from the National Library of Medicine. I use an example from this source to help with this envision. My first source is from the National Library of Medicine, titled An Effective Tool for Global Health. This source discusses global health in physical, mental, and social aspects. It uses a holistic approach to health promotion. I found this article specifically helpful for examples of different types of economic levels and defining holistic. My second source is more recent, titled A Practice Beyond Cultural Humility. It is a great source for everyday healthcare practice in terms of practicing cultural humility. It also gives examples of how to be more culturally aware. This source was more useful in my own benefit.